A reversal of American concepts of otherness in the fiction of Suis and Far by Annette White Parks, published by the Oxford University Press on behalf of the Society for the Study of the Multi-Ethnic Literature of the United States in 1995. As we have discussed in class, it is easy to find ourselves imagining the narrator of a story to be the stereotypical heterosexual white male. We do this because historically, the canon of literature has been such that allows for a lack of diversity, portraying differences in ethnicity or gender as otherness, which is discussed in this article. White Parks iterates the ways in which Edith Eaton, or Suis and Far, defies the popular technique employed by ethnic writers of the late 19th century of mediation. Mediation is a technique that emphasizes similarities of two ethnic groups, rather than focusing on what makes them different. This technique was used in order to convey to audience of this time period that those who were outcast and labeled as different due to the color of their skin or the shape of their eyes were not as different as perceived to be. White Parks asserts that there is a key part of mediation which Eaton's writing does not follow. She states that one critical aspect is the stance or attitude a writer assumes towards the cultures of and for whom she is writing. Whereas other writers took the stance of writing for a certain audience and that audience only, following the traditional confines of traditional insider-outsider perspectives, Suis and Far's stance varies. Though her stance varies and her characters don't adhere to the stereotypes that had been developed of Chinese people and of outsiders at this time, Suis and Far does over time take the role of a Chinese American, as we see in the story The Inferior Woman, through the main character of Mrs. Spring Fragrance, and in several of Suis and Far's other stories. At this time, other popular North American writers were also writing about Chinese Americans, but in ways that solidified the racist stereotypes of these people through the perspective of otherness. These authors were following suit of authors such as William Bradford from earlier in North American history. His writings from the colonial period of the United States reflected the philosophy of the present day, that North Americans of European descent were inherently more worthy of receiving the role of protagonist and insider, while those with darker skins were placed within the antagonist or outsider role. This initial stance on story writing from the earliest 17th century became the basis of what was considered American literature for the popular writers in Suis and Far's time. White Parks argues that these white protagonists are allowed voices in stories, while the outsiders remain silent and mysterious. In effect, they are robbed of the qualities that make them human, and the stereotypes they are based upon are solidified in the prose. Suis and Far recognizes this trend of popular writers to encourage these racist stereotypes in a letter to an editor in which she says, "I have read many clever and interesting Chinese stories written by American writers, but all seem to me to stand far off from the Chinaman, in most cases treating him as a joke." In stories that follow this protocol, such as The Third Circle, white protagonists venture into the seemingly mysterious and dangerous world of Chinatown, and the characters whom they meet are often unsavory, tricking the protagonist, and are often evil and wicked antagonists of nightmares. Along with this encouragement of stereotypes comes the same glorification of the description of the settings in stories like these. The stairs are always grimy, the curtains soiled, presenting Chinatown as a place to be feared itself. Unlike these stories, and unlike the popular North American writers of this time, Suis and Far's works do not hold the same quality of inhumanity for those characters that would be considered outsiders in society. Instead, White Parks argues that the alien celestial is a human being, and Far's writing is something novel to the late 19th century. In Suis and Far's stories, Chinese Americans take a central role, and white Americans are then placed in the new position of antagonist. White Parks shows several examples of this within Far's stories, in which the main characters, who are Chinese American, are impeded by the inequality and laws of a country that preaches liberty and justice for all, but does not practice this sentiment. Thus, through their differences and the lack of mediation by Far, the stereotypes are revealed not only as shallow, but wrong. Within The Inferior Woman, there is evidence of this role reversal. White Parks argues when Mrs. Spring Fragrance desires to write a book about whites of Seattle for her Chinese friends because they are so mysterious, inscrutable, and incomprehensible, words that would normally be used to describe women like Miss Spring Fragrance herself, and others who fall into the minority of otherness. In this role reversal, White Parks argues that Suis and Far puts the audience within the shoes of the Chinese Americans, thus switching the roles of familiar and unfamiliar. What is considered otherness is not the actions of the Chinese American protagonist, but the actions of the white and of European descent antagonists. Eaton puts us in the shoes of otherness itself, making what popular writers defined as normal seem far more different and strange. Before the Chinamen were to be weary of, but through Sui Sin Far's radically different point of view, White Parks explains that it is now the North Americans of European descent are the ones to be feared and protected against. In conclusion, this is how Sui Sin Far was able to open the literary world to other perspectives of race and culture, and though her work was heavily critiqued for its lack of scholarly style and merit, most do not argue that she was one of the first writers of this time period to present Chinese, as well as feminine, culture to audiences in all their unapologetic differences. Thanks for watching.